With the first month of the NHL season almost done, we are ranking every single NHL team. We got the tier list set up from F to S, ranking every single team from worst to best. So where does your favorite team end up going? And who do I see as the best and the worst team so far? Well, of course, make sure you watch till the end and hit that subscribe button if you're new for more hockey content just like this all throughout the year, presented by BetUS. Speaking of which, today's video is sponsored by BetUS. They help the channel out a ton, and they got the best odds in the industry. If you want to start making picks on the NHL season, you got a lot of different options, whether you can go through the different games, you can of course go through the Stanley Cup winners as well, but just recently it's been released and you can go through almost every single league playing right now. You can go through the SHL games, you can go through KHL games, even AHL games up to this point as well. So at BetUS, if you want to make picks on any hockey league or any hockey game, BetUS is the place to do so. Just use code YouTube150 when you guys sign up, and you'll get an 150% sign-up bonus on your first deposit and 125% sign-up bonus on your next two deposits. And thank you to BetUS for sponsoring today's video. Now let's get into the rankings for the start of the season, and I want to preface this because I think it is important. This ranking is not factoring in expectations before the season whatsoever. This isn't a power rankings. This is just ranking every single team based on how they played up to this point. For instance, there's a team like Nashville that I had pretty high expectations for coming into the year, but they started out pretty slowly, so we're just going to be basing them off of this season start. And I think that's what keeps it the most fair. And exciting too, because there's a few picks here that early on have surprised me as well. Now, to have a little bit of fun with it, we've also renamed the tiers here. We got 6 different ones, starting out in the bottom tier with the Darnell Nurse tier. This is pretty self-explanatory. Then we go to the lottery team level. It's not necessarily meaning that they're going to be a lottery team by the end of the year, but up to this point, that's how they played. The same thing with the Fringe teams tier, the playoff team tier, the Stanley Cup contender year tier, and ultimately the Stanley Cup favorites. Now let's start out at number 32, and this should come as no surprise. With the 32 spots, I mean, it has to be the San Jose Sharks. Though, getting their first win just recently, you do love to see it. There's been a couple of bright spots. Mikael Granlund specifically has been a god to start out the season. 5 goals, 13 points in 10 games so far. He has been another underrated piece for the Sharks over the last year. But besides that, the team defense has just been horrid. The goaltending hasn't been able to make up for it, and a 1-7-2 record puts them in last place. Another pretty obvious ranking here at number 31. This is where the Philadelphia Flyers are going to come. Another situation kind of like San Jose, but unlike the Sharks, they haven't really had the injuries to really make too many excuses. The Flyers have just been pitiful. They've had so many line combinations. They've been trying so many different things, yet nothing really seems to work. And with a 2-6-1 record, 31st makes sense. Now for the last team in the Darnell Nurse tier, the F tier here, we're actually going to have a joining of Pennsylvania because this is where the Pittsburgh Penguins are going to end up. I didn't really expect the Penguins to have much success, but like we covered in yesterday's video, which I highly recommend you check out, the Penguins have just been an absolute mess up to this point. Even players like Sidney Crosby, who you usually can rely on to carry Pittsburgh, have had lackluster starts and efforts to start out the season. Tristan Jarry is in the AHL. They've had to have Blomqvist come and save up their season, but the defense as a whole has just been horrid throughout the entire roster, and it's pretty easy to see why they're 3-6-1 to start out the year. Now we go on to the lottery team level, and the first team to enter this tier is going to be the Chicago Blackhawks. I do think they've actually been a little bit better than I was expecting. They're not bottom 3, which is a success. Now that's not to say that Chicago's been good or anything, but I do think we've seen a little bit of an increase in their team defense up to this point, and I think for Chicago being 3-6-1 with Bedard not even playing his best, that's a success. Next up, this is where I'm going to have the Montreal Canadiens coming in at number 28. The big reason for this has just been how bad the team has been defensively. They've been a little bit better over the last couple of games, but not by much. Montembeault, especially in the first few games, had to absolutely bail them out. But there hasn't really been that much progress for the Habs this season, which I was expecting to be the case with the injuries to Patrick Laine and the weird play of Kirby Dach so far. A lot of things haven't gone right for the Habs, but I think in a lot of cases, that was what I was expecting heading into the year. Next up in the lottery team level tier, this is where I'm going to have the Anaheim Ducks. Another season elite to start out where there's not a lot of pretty evident progress. They've had a couple of bright spots. Troy Terry has been good, and Lucas Dostal right now rocking a 9.36 save percentage. Love to see that out of my goat. But besides that, a lot of their younger players have disappointed up to this point. Cutter Gauthier, Mason McTavish, Trevor Zegras. It's been pretty middling results thus far, and the team defense is the same team defense we've seen out of Anaheim the past few years, which is not good. I was really hoping Anaheim would prove me wrong and really take this massive next step, but it seems like they're not really taking any step whatsoever again, which I think is starting to become a little bit of a problem here. Especially now that you have Dostal carrying them with a 936 save percentage, you don't even have the goaltending excuse anymore. So things I think really need to change for the Ducks here soon. Now, number 26 here, I'm going to have the Seattle Kraken. They're a team that I could pretty easily see raising a few spots in the next couple weeks or so, but up to this point, they've just kind of been in that middling range for me. The offense, again, I think has been a bit of a problem. Jared McCann has been having a great start to the season, but besides that, they only have 2 players right now above 5 points on the year, and that's Jared McCann, of course, and Jordan Eberle. And I think offensive levels have continued to be a problem for this Kraken team. It was a major problem last season, but even though the depth is still strong this year, we'll have to wait and see if it's going to be able to make up for the lack of star power. Thankfully, though, it seems like Joey Daccord is on the similar level as he was last year. And if he can continue that, then Seattle always has a chance. Next up at number 25, this is a team that has obviously had a frustrating start. I'm still a believer in them with how they're playing, but considering some of the individual games they've had here and there, it's impossible really to have the Sabres any higher than this up to this point. I mean, at 25, I think this is a pretty realistic range for them. They've had really great games, and then they would come up with a stinker right after. Consistency is obviously going to be a problem for a young team like this, but there have been great moments that I didn't quite see out of the Sabres last year, so I think that gives me still some more optimism. Thankfully, Tage Thompson looks to be back at his great 2022 level. You've also got JJ Peterka rocking amazing numbers, and I really love Ryan McLeod so far for the Sabres, but again, that consistency is going to be key. If they can find it, they're a playoff team, but that's a big hurdle to climb over. Next up, we're going to go on to the Fringe teams level, and this is one that I love to see a major surprise in, because starting us out, I have the Columbus Blue Jackets. They've actually been pretty solid over these last couple of games, and right now I'm going to give them the flowers they deserve. You look at it, and they've had some pretty great success stories on the foregroup already. Kirill Marchenko, a beauty, has just started out so well. 4 goals, 11 points in 8 games. Sean Monahan, I have been absolutely wrong about up to this point, and I love to see that. He's been great as a first-line center for the Blue Jackets. 5 goals, 9 points in 8 games. Werenski has been healthy and has been putting up a point-per-game clip. You got Igor Chinikov having a great start of the season. Even players like Olivier, who have 4 goals, 6 points in 8 games, are not that type of player, but have been that type of player to start out the season. For the Blue Jackets, it's 4-3-1, so it's not like they're on an otherworldly tier, but dang it, man, for Johnny Gaudreau, I love that they've had this start. And it's not even been with great goaltending either. I mean, Daniil Tarasov leads the team in wins, and he has an .886 save percentage, so the fact the Blue Jackets are still being able to overcome that is great to see. Next up, we move on to number 23, and this is where I'm going to have the Nashville Predators. I have full belief that they're going to be back at a great level towards the end of the season, but this start was obviously a pretty rough one. Starting out 5-0, as bad as you could possibly start out. It was for a myriad of reasons, but I think it was mostly because of all the newcomers. You got to consider Stamkos, Marchessault, O'Shea, and a lot of the other guys too. They're great players, but they need time to acclimate, especially for guys that were on their teams for a while. Marchessault with Vegas, Stamkos with Tampa. Getting into a new system with new teammates and everything takes quite a bit of time, and it did to start out the year. But now you're starting to see the team play a lot better, and they're 3-0-1 in their last 4 games. I have full confidence that Nashville will be able to turn it around, but so far, they're at the Fringe team's tier. Another team that is in a similar position, but we'll have to wait and see on that, is the Edmonton Oilers, who come in here at number 22. This is going to be interesting because we had that injury to McDavid in that Blue Jackets game, which is going to really affect Edmonton's season. We don't really have much of an idea of what the injury is going to look like, but if it's anything long-term, Edmonton is just simply dead in the water, or Draisaitl will have to play at an MVP level. We'll have to wait and see, but up to this point, Edmonton has just been in their usual early season woes, where they can't score on the rush, they can't score on the power play, the defense has been horrible. Darnell Nurse. It's not quite at last year's level where the unluckiness was just unbelievable, but this season also hasn't started out too well, and considering a McDavid injury too, it hasn't been too successful. Next up, going on to number 21, another contending team that has had a slower start. I'm going to have the Boston Bruins in this position. This has been a running theme throughout this season for the Bruins, that the top end guys have been overpassed by the depth. I mean, you look at just the plus minus, obviously a flaw stat, but Pastrnak right now is a -3 with just 8 points in 9 games. Meanwhile, Cole Kopke has 7 points in 9 games. Mark Kastelik has 6 points in 9 games. John Beecher has 6 points in 9 games as well. And you can look at just how good that fourth line has been for the Bruins. It's really carried their offense up to this point. But look at the top end guys. Pastrnak, 8 points in 9 games. Marchand, 6 points in 9 games. Lindholm, 5 points in 9 games. You got McAvoy with only 3 points in 9 games. To me, that has been the biggest problem up to this point. I think it will eventually correct itself, but the depth has really been making sure this Bruins start isn't worse than it is. Next up, just getting inside the top 20 to start out the year is the Ottawa Senators, who have had a pretty weird start to the season, but still, they started out 4-2-0 with the Linus Ullmark injury during that stretch, and that was pretty impressive. Since then, it's been a little bit less successful when Linus Ullmark has come back, coincidentally enough. But I still think the Senators are in a unique position. They've had some great games here and there, and they've kept a lot of these games close, which I think is the key for a young team like this. But like Buffalo, finding that consistency is going to be massive for them. And hey, their last couple of losses were big, high-scoring bouts against teams like Vegas and Colorado, so it's not the end of the world they lose versus those two. Now at number 19, just above the Senators, this is where we're going to have the Detroit Red Wings. They're a team that I really debated having a lot lower. Their record has been fine up to this point, and the goaltending has been incredible. Alex Lyon, again, feels like he always has these stretches during every season where he just steals games for his teams. But Detroit as a whole, I just have not been very impressed with, especially offensively. This team has been strange to start out the season. They haven't really been generating much, and even some of the key contributors like Larkin and Raymond haven't been their usual selves. But I think Detroit will still be in this same position by the end of the season. Still competing for a playoff spot, but with how they played so far, I just feel like the goaltending is really going to have to sustain this for Detroit to have any chance here. Currently, they're 32nd in the NHL in expected goals for per 60 at 5-on-5 and bottom 10 in expected goals against per 60. So I think for the Red Wings to have some sustained success, they need to start generating a lot more than they have. Now, at number 18 here, we're going to go to another Eastern Conference team that's right on that fringe level. This is where we have the New York Islanders. They've also been a team kind of like Ottawa, where they have had some great games and then some weird performances. I think the Islanders are still in that playoff fringe type level. They're always going to be in this position where they're right in the middle of the NHL, and to start off the season, they have been. I will say though, with the offense again being a struggle, Barzal, for example, having 4 points in 8 games, having Duclair out even for the next few weeks is just brutal. He was a great spark plug for them, and I think for the Islanders, that offense is going to be hard to come by over these next few weeks. Now at number 17, as much as I would love to put this team higher, they have been a exciting dumpster to start out this season, and that is the Utah Hockey Club. This is affected by some of the injuries. Of course, Sean Durzi is a massive one, and John Marino not even playing a game to start of this season is just brutal for them. But man, Utah has just been so exciting in all of the ways possible. Blowing 4-1 leads, going out to crazy performances, huge overtime winners. Utah has really had it all to start out this season. Not much consistency, not much defensive play there to start out the year, but I think for Utah, with how good they've been on offense, how prolific they've been there, I'm still going to put them right around the middle of the NHL. But now we officially get into the B tier here and the top half of the NHL. We're going into the playoff team level, and starting us out here, this is where we're going to have the St. Louis Blues, who are around the same range I thought they would be at, still contending for a playoff spot, and right now, I think for St. Louis, they're on that trajectory. They're 5-4, so it's not like they've blown the roof off of anything, but the goaltending is held strong. The youth has been solid for them, and overall, they got a good balance of depth and also star power there that so far has put them on a pretty good level. Now, coming in at number 15, we're starting to see the roof off of this team fall a little bit back down to earth, and that is the Calgary Flames. Now, still, respect to them. They've been pretty great to start out the season. They started out even better, having 5-0-1, but since then, they've kind of come back down to earth, and rightfully so. In the first few games, the whole team was playing well, but I would say to start out the season, Andersson has been the big mainstay for me, the player that has really risen past expectations, but also players like Zari and Pospisil and Huberdeau played great offensively, and then you got the goaltending and Dustin Wolf, who has been incredible up to this point. I mean, I had him top 3 in my Calder race. I thought he was a dark horse for the Calder, and so far, that has absolutely been true. He has stayed at a brilliant level. I think for the Flames to have even just a bit of success going forward, Wolf needs to stay at that great success level because he has been solid up to this point. Especially to start out this season, you had pretty much the whole team buying in. Since then, I would say, and afterwards, I would say the big success stories have still been Rasmus Andersson. Connor Zary has been great. Marian Pospisil, even Jonathan Huberdeau have been up to great offensive levels. But Dustin Wolf especially has been the big one that's really been carrying the load. He has been fantastic to start out the season. I had him as a dark horse for the Calder Trophy, and so far, that's been the case. Next up at number 14, this is where I'm going to have the Toronto Maple Leafs. Obviously, starting out the season slow wasn't too much of a surprise. Getting accustomed to Craig Berube's coaching style was always going to take a bit of growing pains, especially for the top-end players. And you got Austin Matthews specifically, who has had some real big growing pains to start out the season. I think he'll be fine eventually, but him and players like Nylander have started off on an okay level, but I think have a lot more to go. But I think overall the Leafs have still been solid. I think especially Anthony Stolarz has been one of the best goalies in the league to start of the season, and he's made this start, I think, a lot better for the Leafs than it would have been. Speaking of a team that if they continue to play like they have, I think will be a top 10 team, this is where I have the Colorado Avalanche. Their record isn't the best. They're 500 right now with a 5-5 record, but I think the underlying statistics for the Avs and also how they've been playing recently, especially the last week or so, I think is positive signs. They've actually been playing really well, and this, I think, is why Bednar is a top coach in this league, and why I thought the potential firing rumors of him, especially earlier on in the season, were a little bit silly, because this guy can coach. This guy can make players buy in, and we've seen over the last week how much things have changed from the first few games for the Avs. Things have gotten a lot better for them, and if they could get some goaltending, this Avs team is going to be in a different position, but goaltending has been a major issue. Even though of how bad Georgiev has been, if Anaheim can keep a .905 save percentage going, then I think the Avs should be in a playoff spot with how they're playing, even with the injuries they've had, which is, I think, a pretty big success. Next up at number 12, we're going to go on here to the Vancouver Canucks, who without Thatcher Demko have started out really well on this season, about as good as you can considering your starting goaltender is gone. Kevin Lankinen, who has been one of the best backups in the league for year after year after year, is playing well as a starter for the Canucks, but I think it's also the depth that's been really good for them. 10 different players for the Canucks have 4 points or more, and Elias Pettersson only has 4 points on this season. So considering how pedestrian he's been, having for the Canucks to be in this position is a pretty big successful turn for them. And once Demko is there, I think things are going to get even better for him. Now we're going to go on to the last team in the playoff team level tier, and this is a team that started out really well, but has kind of been a lot slower over these last couple weeks, and that is the New Jersey Devils. I would like to have them in the top 10, considering how well they started and how good some of the depth is played, but there's been some pretty big warning signs. For one, they've had some injuries. Obviously, Luke Hughes and Brett Pesce just started playing recently for the Devils, but they've obviously had some growing pains to start out the season. But really, Jacob Markstrom has been the big disappointment. He started out really well in that global series, I believe, versus Buffalo. But then since then, it's been a weird mess and a weird inconsistent streak for him. I still think he'll be able to get past it, but the Devils need him to be a solid goaltender at the very least, and so far, he hasn't quite been that. Now we move on to the A tier, the Stanley Cup contender tier, and this doesn't mean that this team is going to win the Stanley Cup or anything, but this just means how they played up to this point. I think they deserve to be up at this spot. Starting us out here, number 10, this is where I'm going to have the LA Kings, who I saw being a playoff team this year. Some people had them dropping out, but so far I think they played very well. When LA is playing their best defensive level, they can be a strangling team, and that's what they've done to start out this season. They're second in expected goals against per 60, only behind the Minnesota Wild, who have been on a different level defensively. But LA has also been in a league of their own, and I think for the Kings, that buy-in has been extremely important, especially with Drew Doughty out, which I think is the big thing. The fact that the Kings have not only been able to tread water defensively, but thrive defensively without Doughty, I think is a major success. But you also have players in the offense that have been coming up well, like Alex Turcotte having a solid season. Alex Laferriere has been putting up some great totals so far. So for the Kings, getting that youth and getting them going, and especially even the fact that Quinton Byfield hasn't been that great to start of the season, only 4 assists for 4 points so far. And I think for the Kings, they have a pretty good success line coming up, especially in a weaker division like the Pacific. Next up in the Stanley Cup contender tier, this is where the Tampa Bay Lightning are going to end up. I think the Lightning have had a pretty strong start to the season. I mean, they're a team that I think, especially with the talent there, is always going to be in the mix, but I think especially what we've seen this year has been a lot more buy-in defensively, especially from some of the top-end players, specifically Victor Hedman, who I think has been taking steps back defensively for years now. But this year is on track to have his best defensive season in a long, long time. I think maybe of the 2020s, honestly. But that whole defense has been a lot better than I expected it to be. JJ Moser has been great, transitioning from Arizona to Tampa. Nick Perbix has also had a solid start to the season, but he's always been an underrated defenseman there. But really for Tampa, it's been the top-end guys clicking, Brent Hagel continuing to be a god, and the defense especially making big improvements that has helped Tampa have this strong start. Next, I'm going on to number 8. This was a team that I had in the playoffs that was a bit of a controversial pick, but I stuck with my guns, and so far the Washington Capitals are making that look pretty good. Obviously, a lot of season to go, but the Caps have started out really solidly up to this point. On top of continuing that buy-in defensively that they had in last year, you also see some offensive improvements in Dylan Strome again. You have Connor McMichael, who's playing the best hockey of his career. John Carlson has been great to start up the season. And on top of the defensive buy-in, the goaltending hasn't been that great either. You have Logan Thompson, you have Charlie Lindgren, 2 great goaltenders, below a .900 save percentage to start out this year. So it's not like Washington is getting carried by the goaltending. It's really been the systems, the team structure that has given them so much success last year and is continuing that onto this year with some added offense, which is a nice benefit. Next up, number 7, a team that I have to give a lot of respect to because I wasn't expecting much heading into the season, but that is the Minnesota Wild. They have been great to start out this year. We mentioned how LA was great in expected goals against per 60. Minnesota is first in the league in suppressing chances at 5-on-5, and that has been a great thing to see. They've always had the potential to be a great defensive team, especially with that full group, but this year I think they're really realizing it. And on top of course, great performances, Matt Boldy, Kroll Kaprizov. They've also had players like Marco Rossi being able to fulfill their potential so far, and that has been great for them too. But I think the goaltending has been the biggest thing for him because Phil Gustin might have been the biggest wild card heading into this season. With a great 2023, but a lackluster last season, he was somebody that really needed to prove himself again, and so far he has a .922 save percentage, and if he continues that, Minnesota is a playoff team for sure. He was always a big wild card for the Wild, and so far, so good. Moving on to the next spot, a team that I was not expecting to have this type of offensive level. We got to go to the Vegas Golden Knights here, man. I don't know what the heck happened, but this is just ridiculous. Mark Stone has 18 points in 10 games. Eichel, 16 points in 10 games. Barbashev, 7 goals, 12 points in 10 games. Petrangelo has 12 points in 10 games. Tomas Hertl has 10 points in 10 games. They have 5 different guys right now scoring at a point per game or better rates, and that's with guys like Theodore right behind him. Keegan Kolesar has 4 goals up to this point for some reason. Vegas has just been able to generate so much so far, and that has been the biggest sign of success. I was really worried about the wing depth, about how the offense would look this year. I thought that was going to be a big weakness for them, but so far it hasn't been. I thought the defense was going to carry them, but so far the offense, man, that's been the major success story. Mark Stone has always been our Lord and Savior, but this year is just confirming it. Now, going on to the last team in the Stanley Cup contender tier. This is a team you could have in the Stanley Cup favorites tier for sure. I could understand that, but just outside of number 5, this is where I'm going to have the Florida Panthers. They've been great up to this point. They haven't been perfect, but I think for the Panthers, they're in line to have another great season. You have the usual suspects like Sam Reinhart playing well, but you had Sam Bennett playing unbelievably. Anton Lundell has been great in the wake of Barkov's injury. Then once Barkov comes back, once Tkachuk really starts going here, back from his injury as well, I think the Panthers are going to be in a good spot. The only thing that worries me a little bit has been the goaltending. Both Knight and Bobrovsky are under a .900 save percentage, and that is why Florida's a little bit lower right now, but I think that will correct itself a little bit towards the end of the season, and I think the Panthers will once again be in a strong position come playoff time. But now we go into the cream of the crop, the Stanley Cup favorites here, and starting out this tier, we're going to go with the Carolina Hurricanes. They're a team that I wasn't really sure what to make of heading into the season. They're a team that I didn't really agree with a lot of the offseason decisions they made, but ultimately, Carolina still had a good base and good structure, which will always lead them to some success in the regular season. I still have them as a playoff team, but so far, they've been great to start out the year. Freddie Andersson has a .941 save percentage, which helps quite a bit. He'll probably put up an .892 in the playoffs, and the Hurricanes will lose in the second round, but at least so far, he's been up to a strong level. But Martin Necas has also been a bright spot. Shane Gostisbehere has been brilliant, and he's somebody that I think Detroit is really missing right now on their defense, but I think for the Hurricanes, a strong start of the season. Not a big surprise, but at this level, it's good to see. Now, my number 3, some people might have them a little bit higher, but this is as high as I think I could put my favorite team in the Dallas Stars. They're a team that I think has been heavily carried by the goaltending up to this point. They're 7-2, but both Casey DeSmith and Jake Ottinger have above a .935 save percentage, which is about as good as you could possibly ask for your goaltending tandem. Outside of that, I think the Stars have had some warning signs. The defense has still been a little bit of an issue at times, and some of the star power too. Rupe Hintz is below a point per game. Jason Robertson having 6 points in 9 games, so it hasn't been the greatest start to the season for them, but I think considering everything, the Stars are still in a solid position, and I think the goaltending playing as well as it has been is going to be great going forward, especially in Ottinger's case, who I think could have a Vezina-like season, which would be great to see. But now we go into the final 2 teams here in the New York Rangers and the Winnipeg Jets, and just coming into the second spot, you could go either way with this, but I'm going to have the Winnipeg Jets at number 2. The big reason why I have the Jets at number 2 and not the Rangers is that even though the Jets were undefeated until recently against the Leafs, there were still some things that I think were carrying them. Obviously, Connor Hellebuck is going to be at a great level, but I also think the Jets were a team that was really carried by the power play. Right now, they're at 44%, a big chunk of their goals have come on the man advantage. And I think once things start to dry up a little bit there, things will naturally start to come back down to earth a little bit for the Jets. But really, you wouldn't expect the top end performers to be the guys that are kind of slouching 5-on-5. But I think for the Jets, it's been that third line, Anita Ryder, Lowry, and Appleton, that has easily been their most consistent generator of offense throughout this season. And their line has been unbelievable to start up the season. I think that has been the main success story for the Jets so far. And once those top guys stop getting the power play opportunities, they'll have to figure that out a little bit more easily. But still, the Jets have got off to a great start, and you have to commend them for that, and we'll see how much is able to continue. I still have them as a playoff team, but if they can continue to play this way, then who knows? Maybe they're able to win the Central Division, which would be a pretty cool thing. But now going on to number one, to me, the team that has played the best, the most consistently to start this season, and the team that I think is the best team in the NHL right now, I have the New York Rangers. If we're talking about the whole team and taking everything into account, I think the Rangers have been the most complete team in the league up to this point. You obviously have Igor Shesterkin playing great so far, and that really wasn't much of a surprise. But you look at that forward group, and there is so much to like there with how well Panarin has played, but especially that third line, that kids line of Cooley, Hedl, and Kakko. They have been unbelievable, not just well at scoring goals, but also keeping the puck out of the net. They've been so good in every single area thus far. But I think just the depth the Rangers have had, the strong overall play they've had, how much offense they're generating so far, I think the Rangers are easily my number one, and I think will likely be at least a contender for the President's Trophy, if not winning it by the end of the year. But this is my tier list for the 2025 NHL season so far. And again, this is just taking into account the games that we have played up to this point, not about the expectations, not about what we were expecting or anything like that. This is just how every team has done up to this point. But I would love to hear your thoughts down below on my tier list. What do you agree? What do you disagree with? And what would your list look like? Where would you put your favorite team? Let me know your thoughts down below. And of course, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share it with all the hockey fans you guys know online, and click on this card for all my rankings in one playlist. And thank you so much to BetUS for sponsoring today's video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Have a great hockey day, and goodbye.